Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the Gospel of Luke. And today we're in Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, the birth of Jesus. 7 short verses. That's all we get. We don't get much more than that either in Matthew's Gospel. And Matthew and Luke are the only two Gospels that describe the birth of Jesus. Um, Ma- uh, um, Matthew's Gospel is told. Jesus' birth is told from the perspective of Joseph, but everything in Luke's gospel is told from the perspective of Mary. And and Luke, as we said, he does places this clearly in a historical and a political framework. So, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Now it came about in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken of all the inhabited earth. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all were proceeding to register for the census, every one to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house of the family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was with child. And it came about that while they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son. Do you see this? Her, not there, her. She gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in cloth and strips of cloth, laid him in a manger, a feeding trough, because there was no room for them in the inn, in the house, in the hostel, and wherever it was they were. Okay, let's talk about this. First, let's talk about the timing of it. A lot has been made of who is that Quirinius didn't have a census until later on, 86, and Herod had been dead for 14, 16 years by then, and blah 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 blah. Yes, there was a very famous census that Quirinius, who was governing that area out of Syria, um, conducted as part of an empire-wide census in about 85, which is 86, excuse me, which is well known because it prompted tax riots and they had to be put down and they were serious. But Luke makes clear he's not talking about that census. He's talking about the first census. There were more than there, when he's writing, there's more than one, or he wouldn't have to identify first. And so it clearly has happened earlier, and the Romans would conduct these censuses every 14 or so years, and they were about taxation. There's also the whole notion that uh, we never heard of this. Why would you have to go back to your ancestral homeland? Well, it may be as simple as he has property there, and he has to go sign his name to something because that property is going to be taxed. And I think it is that simple. They're from that area. Um, they're not only related to people from the tribe of Judah, but also from the tribe of Levi that live in that very area. And there may be family property that his name is still attached to, and he has to go sign up so that he can be taxed. I mean, it's probably just that simple. Um, Joseph did not marry her, and this is important. Engagement was as binding as a marriage. The only difference between being engaged and being married is the consummation of the marriage. To end an engagement, you had to go through divorce proceedings, which were identical to whether if you had consummated the marriage. But he does not marry her because the Holy Spirit told him not to, because it has to be clear to everybody this is a virgin birth. And so that's what Joseph does. We're told Joseph's side of things in the Gospel of Matthew, but Luke makes clear they're engaged, but they're not married yet. It's 80 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem. When you're nearly 10 months pregnant, 9 months pregnant, however you figure that, when you're 36, 37, 40 weeks pregnant, and you make that trip of 80 miles, that's a week. I mean, if you're making a fast pace, you can maybe do it in 5 days, but they weren't. And so it's got to be a 7 day, 8 day trip. I mean, that's 10 miles a day. And that's a lot to ask of a, of a pregnant young woman. Um, she gives birth when it's time. Although they have family in the area, they're nowhere where they can get to that family when it's time for the baby to be born. And and so we have this just very simple account. Um, um, the days were completed um, for her to give birth. It's really just 2 lines. She gave birth to her firstborn son. It's hers, and he's the firstborn. They wouldn't say the firstborn. They would say one and only, monogenes. That's a word we know from the Bible, isn't it? But Luke doesn't use that word because she has more sons, sons that we meet in the Bible. Um, um, she has sons and daughters, but Jesus is the firstborn, her firstborn son. She wraps him in strips of cloth. That's what they did um, to keep them straight like this early on. They believed it helped their bones to develop in an orderly and in a very sound way from an engineering perspective, of your skeleton. So that's what they did. And she laid him in a feeding trough. Well, why would she do that? And that's when he tells us because there was no room for them in the inn. So he's there with the animals who have a feeding trough. We're not told it was a barn. We're not told whether it was a cave. The earliest tradition and the most persistent tradition was that there in Bethlehem, which is, as Phillips Brooks wrote in the famous Christmas Carol, a very little town. It is a little town. It was then, it was before, and it continues to be comparatively a small town. And there would have been not a hotel proper there, but on the main road, like a rest area, a rest stop that would have had a few rooms and a place where people could keep their animals. And so it's assumed as travelers that's where they would be. And whether that place to keep the animals would have been a corral or a barn or a cave, and there's a cave that's often associated in the area with it, we don't know for sure. But she had her baby where the animals were being kept, and evidently without the aid of a midwife, which under normal circumstances, as a Jewish young woman, she would have had her female relatives and a professional midwife with her, someone who was trained and who had delivered hundreds of other babies with her. But, she traveled by herself from Nazareth to Judea to see Elizabeth, traveled by herself back home. And now she's with her husband, and it seems like it's just the two of them when the baby is born. Okay. Well, that's not all that happens because the heavens are going to announce the birth, and we'll see that next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.